quick, let's splash back to September 2008. Melamine-tainted milk products from China are blamed for sickening 300,000, hospitalizing 50,000, and killing 6 children in China and surrounding countries. Hello, I'm Jason Huffman, Editor-in-Chief of Food Chemical News. Welcome to the Knife and Fork Show. What's melamine? It's a compound used to make floor tiles and other construction-related materials. It was put in the children's formula to boost the product's protein scores. Following the incident, China immediately promised to crack down on food safety. It executed 2 of the men involved. But I'm sorry to report that it wasn't the first or the last time China was involved in a food safety scandal. Shortly before discovering melamine in its infant formula, China confronted a scandal involving melamine in pet food. And not too long after the infant formula incident, there was an incident involving clenbuterol, a growth steroid, being placed in pork to make pigs leaner. Of course, my favorite is the account of exploding watermelons. About 20 Chinese farmers applied a growth accelerator to watermelons in their fields, adding up to 45 hectares. They messed up, they used it during a rainy period, which caused the watermelons to, boom, in the fields. Oh, China, 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 China. We're back with Ben England, president of FDAimports.com. He's helped hundreds of companies get their food products into the United States, including a number of clients in China. Ben travels to China almost every year to meet with food company executives and regulatory officials. Ben, China was the 4th leading importer over the first 4 months of the year. People spent about $1.5 billion on their products. The reputation for China is really lousy. Is that reputation fair?
You know, China, there's 2 ways to think of China. One is sort of China proper, right? And the other is the Chinese businesses, the people who are in the business in China who are shipping product to the United States. I think that to the extent that China has sort of a culture that we're not familiar with, that doesn't supply so much rigor with respect to safety built into the regime, then I think it's fair. I think that it's a large country. There's a lot of industry in the country. They produce a lot of products, much of which they consume there, and then they run into the problems they had with respect to melamine, and then they ship the rest out. And if they're going to operate on their sort of domestic safety regime, that exportation is going to be problematic in this country where we have such a high safety standard. So in that respect, I think it is fair. I don't think it is fair, though, to say, well, the countries and the companies in China, the food's from China, therefore it's safe and it's hazardous, because that simply isn't true.
Okay. You've made several trips to China, and just a couple months ago you made another one. Talk a little bit about your experience. What do you see when you go there? What do you hear from the people there? What do they think about the U.S. as an export destination? Talk a little bit about your trips.
Yeah, you know, the Chinese companies really desire to ship product in the United States. They know they feel they have a good brand, they have a good product. Their difficulty is ordinarily in reaching and making access contact points with buyers in the United States, not importers, but sort of the distributors, the retailers, the people that are supplying the product to the consumer. Most of the companies in China, the places I've been to, very clean. They have a lot of pride in their product and a lot of pride in their work. And so my experience has always been very, very positive. Now, I sometimes have to help companies who are having problems. And in most cases, it's a matter of teaching them what they need to do. And they are prepared to learn. They're prepared to invest the money in order to do it properly. And they, in fact, do so eventually.
Yeah. We talked earlier, and we talked about what goes wrong between the suppliers and the importers. And you're actually trying to address that yourself. What is it that happens between those 2 parties that causes some of these problems?
Yeah, you know, the Chinese seller, as I mentioned, they have limited contact with the retailer. It means the importer is a middleman. You know, all along the supply chain, the buying and selling that happens to the supply chain, there's people taking a profit. And because the Chinese supplier doesn't have access to the final buyer in the United States, they're relying on the importer to tell them.
And the importer might be a U.S. company.
Yeah, the importer would be ordinarily a U.S. company here in the United States to tell them what that they need a better price. They're going to push. They got to push on the price and try to get the price down. A company in China knows that there's a high risk that the guy next to him will meet the price, and so the Chinese company is then under a lot of pressure to do the only thing they can do in order to meet the price, which is cut some corners. And that's where you run into the safety potential, right? The risk, the safety risk potential. And so in that respect, we sort of ask for it because we want cheap products. We want it to be economical. It's coming from halfway around the world, and so we keep pushing on the price, and it has to come from somewhere, and it very often comes in quality. In contrast, some companies come to the United States, they create their own importing business, they sort of remove the middleman, and then they're able to control more of that, and they have far less of that price pressure, and they can keep the quality in.
Right. So you're helping the suppliers try to get a more direct connection to the U.S. market?
That's correct. In fact, even helping them create business entities in the United States. They become their own importer. And that's good for a lot of reasons. It's good for business reasons because they're able to sell directly to the end user, but it's good for public safety reasons because the government has access to a part of the company that's right there. And the company learns to speak the language, the safety language of the United States in order to be able to communicate back to their manufacturer in China. So it sort of helps fix the breakdown in communication that can happen between a U.S. buyer and a foreign seller.
Okay. Now that's what you're doing and they're doing. The Chinese government about every couple of months makes some kind of a major announcement of a regulatory overhaul, new regulations coming out. They sound like they're doing a lot. How much of that is talk and how much of that is real action that's making a difference?
Yeah. The way I think to gauge that is how often is the Chinese government actually inspecting to those standards? That's the question, right? So when FDA first came out with its with regulations for seafood, I was in the FDA at the time. We were inspecting over a period of several years, and the first year we inspected, it was a 20% compliance rate, 80% out of compliance. Well, by the 6th or 7th year, it's flipped around, right? So the first year that they've inspected in China under the new regs is about 50%, 40% compliance rate. Well, if they stop there, we have a problem.
Right.
But I might know more next year if they now have a 60% or 65% compliance rate. That's how you learn. But the good, whether they're getting anywhere. And the good thing is that the Chinese government is inspecting to the standard. And then the key is for them to continue to do that. And that's how the industry learns what the requirements are, how to comply with them, and then essentially raise the bar with respect to food safety.
If you had to predict what's going to happen with China the next year or 2 or 5 or 10, where do you think we're going with food imports from China? Are we going to make some strides, make some improvements? Do you think they're having a hard time with this? If you had to guess.
Yeah, I think China's going to do better. I think that they've learned a lot. I think that they've now got regulatory requirements that that they're learning how to put in place. They're working with the U.S. government. The U.S. government, FDA, has offices in China to help them. There's a lot of education. They're hiring companies like us to help them. I think there's a lot of promise.
Okay. Sorry, that's all the time we have for this episode of the Knife and Fork Show. Be sure to come back again in a week to see our last segment with Ben England. We'll talk about one of his favorite topics, a major legislative overhaul in the U.S. that is giving importers, foreign government officials, and even some FDA officials some bad ulcers. If you ever have trouble finding the Knife and Fork Show, just go to where we make these videos available, www.foodchemicalnews.com. Thanks for watching. See you again soon.